بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله وسلم على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم اللهم لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما تعلمنا وزدنا من فضلك علما وتعليما إنك على كل شيء قدير ربنا آتنا من لدنك رحمة وهيئ لنا من أمرنا رشدا رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. I just wanted to share a few words on this topic of Ramadan and the Qur'an. Now, Ramadan has always been understood to be the very month of the Holy Qur'an. And this has been a Muslim, an ongoing Muslim practice and understanding from the very earliest community. So we find, for example, the very earliest and great scholars of law and hadith from the early community, they would always take time out of their otherwise incredibly busy teaching schedules so they could devote themselves to Quranic recitation. And they narrate from these people stories and numbers we frankly would find hard to believe. That someone like Imam Shafi'i would finish the Qur'an 60 times in Ramadan. Similarly, they said of Imam Abu Hanifa. We find also even earlier than that, Sayyidina Umar ibn al-Khattab radiallahu anhu, he instated this event, this practice where he gathered the believers together to recite extra prayers in the evening behind a qari to finish the entire Qur'an in the month of Ramadan in 20 rak'ahs. The imam he chose was Ubay ibn Ka'b, the scribe of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And the Taraweeh prayer was a very lengthy endeavor. It was a lengthy, almost all night long experience where the community comes together to reflect on the Holy Qur'an. They would recite 4 rak'ahs together in prayer, long prostration, long bowing and so on. And then they would have a very long break, equal in approximate length to those 4 rak'ahs, in which people would recite the Qur'an. If they're in Mecca, they would do tawaf. Then they do 4 more, then a very long break, and 4 more, and a very long break. So it's a very long event of communal worship in reciting the Qur'an together over this holy month. Some of the hadiths of the Muwatta, they relate that people would have to rush home just to eat their morning meal before the fast, because this prayer took up almost the entire night. Again, maybe in the shorter nights of the year. Now this connection then, Ramadan being the month of the Qur'an, why has it been such an established, ongoing, continual practice down to our time? It's because the Qur'an itself emphasizes that. So the Qur'an, when it speaks about fasting, the month of fasting, in Surah Al-Baqarah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم يا أيها الذين آمنوا كتب عليكم الصيام كما كتب على الذين من قبلكم لعلكم تتقون. I'm assuming you've heard this verse expounded in the earlier sessions. The verse is telling the believers, no, this fasting is an important injunction that people before you have been doing. It's an ancient rite of worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Why? So that you would acquire something in your own spiritual understanding, a consciousness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So it's an ancient rite, an ancient ritual with clear spiritual fruits. But it doesn't stop there. The Qur'an then emphasizes the time separately from that ritual. That the very time that's been chosen is a time that's special by its own virtue. And so what is the time? It says, شَهْرُ رَمَضَانَ الَّذِي أُنزِلَ فِيهِ الْقُرْآنِ. This ancient ritual of spiritual purity and devotion has been chosen for this month because it's a special month in its own right. It's the month in which the holy book has been revealed. And so what the Qur'an is saying is then our entire ritual of fasting and devotion and prayer, it's meant to be almost, you can say, a celebration of this great historical event when the Qur'an first came to our Master Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And not just a celebration, not just an act of thanksgiving and appreciation and devotion to thank Allah for this book which has changed history and changed our own lives. And it's what gives meaning to each and every one of us. But beyond all of that, it's to prepare us to connect to Allah through the book in a very special way. Because the Qur'an also tells us that fasting and revelation themselves are connected ideas. So the Qur'an tells us about the revelation of the Torah to our master Moses alayhi salatu wassalam. The Torah didn't just come to him, although he's such a purified soul and he's the chosen messenger of Allah. But he himself was told to go away from his people and go to the mountain and observe 30 days of devotion, which involved fasting and prayer and purification. And he's already a purified soul. And then on top of those 30 days, 10 more days were added, and it became 40 days. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed the injunctions, the commandments of the Torah. This idea that no, you have to be devoted, you have to devote yourself to Allah, deny yourself something of this material world, so you can really be ready to receive the book. And each of us has to receive the book, to understand the book, to let the book settle within us. And that's what this month is ultimately about. It's preparing you and directing you to receive the book to the best of your ability. Our Master Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam likewise, he was away from his people. He was in the cave. He was devoted. He was diminishing of that material connection. And he is a purified soul. But it was that connection, that cutting off, that then was the time that Allah chose to begin this event that we're celebrating and that we are connecting with. And so that's why then, from the earliest of times, the practice has been, whatever people's lives might be, they were farmers or traders or merchants or whatever they were, they had this general idea that they wanted to prepare their year in a way that, as much as they're able to fulfill most of their work on their land or in their shop or in their trade or whatever their business was, so they can have less work to do in this blessed month. Not to rest and sleep and relax, but so they could then be ready to devote themselves as much as they were able to recite more Qur'an than they normally would, to study more tafsir than they normally would, to perhaps attend more classes of Quranic interpretation than they normally would, to offer more prayers in reciting the Qur'an than they normally would, to review what they've memorized of the Qur'an so that they don't forget it. But above all, the fruit and the injunction or the command, above all, it's not about simply learning more or doing more. It's ultimately about change. Ultimately, what it means to receive the book is that you are the pages on which this book is written, and you are the fruit of this engagement. And that's what in the very famous hadith of Sahih Bukhari, our Master Abdullah ibn Abbas radiallahu anhuma, what does he narrate? Very insightful words. He says, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam was the most generous of people in general. He was the most generous of people. But then he says, but he was even more generous in the month of Ramadan. Why? He says, because that's when he was meeting Jibreel alayhi salam and reviewing the Qur'an. So it's a prophetic practice to review and repeat and recite more. And then Ibn Abbas says, so when he was meeting Jibreel in these nights, alayhi salam, كَانَ أَجْوَدَ بِالْخَيْرِ مِنَ الرِّيحِ الْمُرْسَلَةِ. He was even more generous with the good, with spreading the good, than this fast-blowing wind. It's an unstoppable force. It's vast, it's wide, it's quick, and it reaches everyone. And so here you have the Prophet, a purified soul, already the most generous of people, but he wanted to show, and he was showing through himself, that there has to be a palpable increase. And he's already at the limit of the best. So with us, we have a lot more to increase in. But he had a palpable increase. In what? In goodwill, in charity. Showing that the ultimate fruit and the ultimate sign that this month has prepared us, and we have in fact received the book in this blessed month, the ultimate fruit is us, ourselves. It's that the people who live with us, they say, oh, you're smiling more than normal, you're more courteous than normal, you're more patient than normal, you're more helpful than normal, you're more giving than normal. That is the ultimate mark. That is the ultimate fruit. And it's a month, Ramadan is a time where you might be feeling more frustrated. You're hungry, you're irritable perhaps, you're missing your coffee perhaps. But Ramadan is not just about hunger. this Quranic engagement is meant to cover all of that with its absolute opposite, with an increase in goodwill. Why does the Qur'an now have that effect? That if someone really devotes themselves to Allah through His book, that the change is something that's meant to be so palpable and so instant and so visible. Why does the Qur'an do that? Then we can maybe reflect a little bit on the Qur'an itself. What is the Qur'an? There's a verse in Surah Al-Zumar, a very beautiful verse, in where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala Himself describes the Holy Book. So what does He say? It's a verse describing the Holy Book, but the subject of the verse, the first word actually is Allah. Allahu nazzala ahsan al-hadith, the verse starts. The most important thing about the book that you have to bear in mind always is Allah. That's it. It's Him. It's His speech. It's Him revealing Himself. Allah. Then the verse says, Allahu nazzala ahsan al-hadith. Allah has revealed over time and periods the very best of speech, the very best of content, the very best thing that people should want to discuss. Its content is excellent and it's needed. Kitaban, it's a book. Mutashabihan, which shabah means a resemblance. And mutashabih means all of it resembles itself. Other verses of the Qur'an use the word mutashabih to mean ambiguity. Why? Because when everything resembles everything, you can't make it out. What is it? As opposed to something which is bayyin, which is it's separate. Bayyina means it's separate from everything. It's clear. You can concentrate on it. So mutashabih has been used in the Qur'an for ambiguity, but that's not what it's talking about in this verse. This verse is praising the book as an excellent book. And so all of it resembles itself. In what? In its absolute beauty. In its absolute captivating power. You know, the Arabs were old poets. You know, they would love to describe beauty. Whether it's in animals or it's in that fair maiden, they want to describe her eyes and her nose and her cheekbones and all these features. But the most beautiful thing to describe is the thing where you can't notice, is it the eyes or is it the cheekbone? Because it's all beautiful. Every part and every piece is just captivating. And so it's a book that's thoroughly captivating in every single one of its parts. Mutashabihan. Mathani. Mathani means it comes again and again. It's repetitive. Repetitive here is not a sign to show, oh, it's boring. But it's a sign to show that its ultimate purpose and aim is not simply to shock and awe and then to leave you. But it's to come at you again and again, again and again, again and again. Sometimes with a story, sometimes with a similitude, sometimes with a threat, sometimes with a promise. Why? Because it's there to change you. It's not going to leave you. It's not going to leave you, you've fallen on your knees and then it walks off. But it'll come back at you. It'll come back at you till you get up and you start walking. It won't leave you walking slowly, but it'll come back at you until you walk faster. So this book is your companion. This book is your teacher. This book is your trustworthy friend. It will never leave you. As long as you don't leave it, it will keep coming at you with what you need. Mutashabihan mathani. And that's why it has its effect. تَقَشَعِرُّ مِنْهُ جُلُودُ الَّذِينَ يَخْشَوْنَ رَبَّهُمْ. As a consequence of this beauty, this splendor, Allah, the first word, not to forget, it's God's message. As a consequence of all of this, then what happens? The very skins of those people who have awe of their Lord start to tremble thereat. Because it's a powerful, it's an experience. It's an actual living, palpable experience. Where does it first leave its mark? Of course, it's on the human heart. But the mark ripples across until all you have a mention of is the extremities themselves. The very skins tremble thereat. But it's not just to be a novel experience, because then it says, ثُمَّ تَلِينُ جُلُودُهُمْ وَقُلُوبُهُمْ إِلَى ذِكْرِ اللَّهِ. But then after that, after the experience, then them find themselves in this very deep peace. And their skins soften. And their hearts soften. Towards what? What is the source of that peace? It's the dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so the very final word in this passage to describe the book is Allah. And the beginning of this description was Allah. It's from Him. And its effect is to take you back to Him. And that is the great peace. And that is what the believers have sought through their lives in this journey with the Holy Book. And so it's important then, as each of us, we then have to each of us embark on a journey in which we are trying to take more steps than we normally do in this season, which is the season of the Holy Qur'an. Now, some of you might not have that much time. We don't live in a country where it's always that easy to take time off for the holy month. Many of us are employees. We can't just seal our shop and manage our own business the way that we'd like. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaks about this in the Holy Qur'an. In Surah Al-Muzammil, again, a very nice, beautiful, short chapter, which is speaking of lengthy Quranic recitals in lengthy night prayers and encouraging that. But the very final verse of that surah, it says, well, actually Allah knows that some people of you won't be able to manage these lengthy night prayers because you might be sick, or perhaps you might be traveling in the land seeking profit, an honest profit to spend on your family. And Allah says these are all virtuous acts. And so then He simply says, فَقْرَأُوا مَا تَيَسَّرَ مِنَ الْقُرْآنِ. If that's the case, then each of you recite what is easy for you to recite of the Holy Book, whatever it might be. And so the message for each of us is to recite whatever is easy, whatever you're able, and whatever your time allows, direct yourself and devote yourselves. If some of you struggle with the recitation of the Arabic, then this is a wonderful time to learn that. You might say, well, I don't feel spiritual learning simply the act of reading, but you have to realize it's a journey. And you have to invest in yourself now, and you'll find its fruits in this life journey. You recite with difficulty. The Prophet said, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, you get a double reward if you recite with difficulty. You find it hard perhaps to review. Maybe it's difficult, or it's, you memorized a lot at some period in your life and now you've forgotten it. So you make an intention to review, to practice. And in the beginning, maybe it's burdensome to practice, to review. You make a mistake, you come back to it again. But it's a journey that requires patience. And over that time of patience, you'll find the beauty of repetition. Because the people of old, as we'll see a little bit, they repeated a lot. And that they found in that the savior of thinking and contemplating. And so the biggest thing we have to realize is journeys require patience. And you have to bear the fruit in front of your very eyes, which is what we've been talking about. What is the fruit? That kind of captivating experience that this verse of the Qur'an is talking about. But you have to spend a little bit of yourselves. And that all depends on where you are on this journey. And wherever you are, it's a good place to be, because you're on the journey. And so whether it's learning how to read, or whether it's trying to review surahs that you've forgotten, or whether it's reciting many long verses, wherever you are, you have to connect to Allah, have a goodly intention and be patient. Okay, then it comes to understanding. When it comes to understanding, you might be in different places on your journey. You might be inspired to learn a little bit of Arabic. And everyone who's learned Arabic will tell you, yeah, it's a tremendous journey. It takes a while, but its fruits are incredible. Its fruits are incredible in how you recite the Qur'an, in an entire civilizational experience of the Qur'an being open to you. It's a life-changing journey, and you could start that this month. It just takes a bit of patience and a bit of clear goal setting. You might be reading translations. And at times these translations will move you and you'll feel beautiful, and at times they'll puzzle you. And you have to realize it's a journey. This is a book that's been recited for over 1,000 years. It's a book that's contained the central laws of, again, an entire civilization that changed the world in laws. It's a book that contains passages of spirituality, of descriptions of the world that an entire civilization has spent itself thinking about and learning and responding to and developing, it will be too arrogant to say you must get it all in a day. It will be too arrogant to say that, oh, you must make sense of every single story the way you like it today. And the arrogant, they don't get much out of the book. And much of the Qur'an is just a curse to those who were arrogant with the books that came before. And the arrogant will never learn the meaning of this book. But the meaning of this book is for the humble, who come to the book and say, oh Allah, I do not know, so teach me. And they recite of the book and they say, oh Allah, teach me of it what I need to understand, so I can practice it. It's a journey for the humble. And the arrogant will get nothing. And so all of us have to come to it with humility. And you might find puzzles. You might say, oh, why is there so much repetition of the hellfire, of the paradise, of this, of that? But if you reflect and you ponder and you tread on this journey, you'll realize that all of this is just to keep you awake so you don't sleep. All of this is to keep you on your feet so you don't fall. There's no more books coming. And so this book is not simply to inform, but it's to take those steps with you. And that's why there's the loving reminders again and again. And you'll realize over time that that fear is really helpful to you, just like that hope is. Those scary images are as useful to you as those blissful images. It's all about you. And when you realize that, you become grateful. You might come across these stories and you wonder, well, why are the stories coming again and again in these little snippets? But if you're patient and you reflect and you ask Allah, then you'll realize that actually each of those stories are actually more about you than they are about the person in the story. The story only came with a little bit of a reminder to remind you something. The story of Adam comes in Surah Al-Baqarah for a very particular idea, to remind man of his great purpose on earth and his great mission he has. And the very same story comes again in Surah Al-A'raf with a small spin on it, to remind man of that man can fall, and then you have to repent and you have to come back. The very same story comes again and again for a very different purpose. The point is, you have to look for the lessons. It's not storytelling. It's about you and you're changing and you're coming back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so all of this needs humility, prayer, begging Allah for insights, and to carry on, and to carry on. And if you go through a month like that, you will look back and you will be the testament to what that journey has given you. And the fruit is that it continues, a journey through the holy book. Why is it that it leads to charity? In this hadith of Abdullah ibn Abbas, because the Quranic message, all of it, can be summarized in very, very simple terms indeed. Ka'b al-Ahbar, who was a rabbi who converted to Islam at the time of the companions, he said of Surah Al-Zalzala, he said it contains all of the Torah and all of the Psalms. Why did he say that? Because of the last two verses. Whoever does an atom's weight of good will see it, and whoever does an atom's weight of bad will see it. In many ways you could say that's the message of the Qur'an. It's not telling you about Judgment Day to give you some facts. It's not telling you about the prophets to give you some facts. It's telling you all of that for just a simple idea, a simple sense of urgency, to do as much good as you can, and to stay from as much bad as you can. Many scholars say the very final revelation of the Holy Book were the verses of Surah Al-Baqarah. وَاتَّقُوا يَوْمًا تُرْجَعُونَ فِيهِ إِلَى اللَّهِ. Protect yourselves from a day when you will then be sent back to Allah. ثُمَّ تُوَفَّى كُلُّ نَفْسٍ مَا كَسَبَتْ وَهُمْ لَا يُظْلَمُونَ. And every soul will be given what it has earned and they will not be wronged. So each of these, you could say, summarize the entire book. Each of them. And that is why the Holy Prophet has shown the engagement with the book is to increase in the good as much as you can, with a sense of urgency. I wanted to end with just a small passage, small pointers of Quranic recital, the manners of Quranic recital. Imam al-Ghazali, he has this book, the Ihya Ulumuddin, 40 books on what it means to change your life, what it means to bring this religion to life, in your life. And one of these books is the Manners of Quranic Recital. And in this book, it's been translated in English. You will find it online, I think, if you Google for it. He gives, outer manners to observe when reciting the Qur'an. Clean your mouth, face the Qibla, observe reverence, basically. And then he gives 10 inner manners of how to approach the Qur'an to really benefit from that recital. So I wanted to end with a very, very quick survey of these 10 points of etiquette. His first two are what he calls فهم عظمة الكلام and التعظيم للمتكلم. He says the very first 2 points of etiquette, we can take them together, is to bring to mind the tremendousness of the speech and to bring to mind and to heart the tremendousness of the speaker. And what he's trying to say is, if you want to benefit from this act of recital or this act of connection to the Qur'an, you're not going to benefit if you don't start by putting yourself in a state of real reverence and awe, which is what this whole month of fasting is also all about. To remind yourself, this is the sacred text, this is the revealed book, this is the speech of God. And this is something everyone can do whether they know Arabic or not. And that's why the most fundamental act of receiving the book is not tied to how much you know. It's tied to how much you can make yourself someone who has deep reverence. And that's why Islamic civilization has been full of people who knew very little, but they recited a great deal of Qur'an. And you all will have relatives or grandparents or their grandparents who were like that. They were extremely devoted to their regular recital and might not have known a great deal. But they were part of a civilizational experience grounded in reverence. The book being a site for a spiritual exchange with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so it's not good to belittle other people's experience for the lack of their knowledge, because it all starts from here. And that's where the verse, I remember the verse started with Allah before it went into the details of the book. And so the first thing is something, when you're praying Taraweeh, how much you might understand or not, just try to be focused on understanding that you are there experiencing the speech of God, Jalla Jalaluhu. That's where it has to start. Then the third one he says is حضور القلب وترك حديث النفس. He says it's having your heart present and to stop daydreaming. And so the point here is to support the first part actually. Again, it's not a reflection of knowledge and understanding at this stage. It's simply an ability to be focused in this spiritual exchange. You're aware that the speech is sacred and you want to protect yourself from daydreaming. Whenever you go off, you bring yourself back. Whenever you go off, you bring yourself back. Inner discipline. This is the third point, and it applies to everyone, however much you know or don't know. The other points are points which are grounded in learning. The more you know, the more you can take from them. So the fourth and the fifth, which are related points, he calls them tadabbur and tafahum. Trying to understand or grasp the meaning of that speech, the deeper meaning, the lessons. And then tafahum, trying to understand what it tells you about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because all of the book is really about Allah revealing Himself. The stories of history are about Allah revealing Himself through history, through people, through wonders. So that we become people who Allah revealed Himself to us in our lives. That's ultimately what the Qur'an is telling us. God revealing Himself in every stage of the story, in the world and in the life of man. And so to ponder on that, to think about that. But this takes understanding now of some of the verses. How I can learn lessons from them and how I learn about Allah through them. And the larger context of everything. The sixth, he says, is to protect yourself from things that prevent you from understanding. And he mentions a few of them. Among them, he says, is trying too hard in your tajweed and pronunciation. That so much so that that's all you're thinking about. In the beginning, that's actually very important. That's part of the journey. To learn about changing your habits to reciting the Qur'an as it was recited, because that's an act of reverence. It's part of the journey. But that's not the goal. And to stop on that goal is going to prevent you from what the goal is. That all you're thinking about is pronunciation, not something beyond that. Another thing he calls a preventative is, first of all, sins. And so the idea is you approach the Qur'an, you ask Allah to forgive you. As you approach the text, so your own lifestyles don't prevent you. Another preventative, he says, is this conviction that you know what everything means already. I've read the book, I've read the tafsir, I know everything. That's what I said. If you come to it with your glass full, nothing will go into it. But you have to come to it with humility, with your glass as empty as you can make it. I do not know, O Allah, so teach me. The seventh one, he calls it takhsis. And the point here is to have the feeling that all of it is speaking to you. Because if you read the books of tafsir, and they're very important books, they say, oh, this verse was about the Quraysh, and this verse was about this group, and this verse is about Fir'aun, and this verse is for Bani Israel. And if you follow all of that, it's all about other people. It's got nothing to do with you. And that's not the point. He speaks about them to give you a lesson. He's threatening them so you can learn something about it. And so you have to feel that everything is for you, and you have to look for that lesson. That's the takhsis. The eighth etiquette, he says, is ta'athur. It's to feel emotionally affected. So if there are verses of fear, he says, try to feel the fear. Verses of hope, try to feel the hope. Verses of good promises, try to feel that longing. Try to feel the repentance. Make dua to Allah in those verses. Have a moment where you're also connecting emotionally, as part of the etiquettes of connecting to the Holy Book. The ninth one, he calls it taraqi, which is elevation. The idea that as you're going through this journey, try to have a higher vantage point in how you're thinking about or experiencing this act of recital. So he has some stories. Just one story I'll share with you. He says, one of the wise men said, I used to recite the Qur'an and I would find no sweetness in it, until I started reciting it as if I'm hearing it from the Prophet ﷺ, reciting it to his companions. Then I was raised to a station above it, and I used to recite it as if I'm hearing it from Jibreel alayhi salam, casting it to the Messenger of Allah ﷺ. And then Allah brought me to another station, and now I hear it from the speaker himself. And I found at that a sweetness and a bliss that I don't know how to stay away from. And he mentions other stories, but the point is that it never stops. It's always something you're seeking an increase in. Again, the experience as we saw in that Quranic verse that we recited earlier on. The 10th and final one, he calls it tabarri, which is to almost distance yourself. To distance yourself from what? From the fruits which you found. And what he means by this is, don't think, oh, I found it, I've made it, that's it, I've arrived, I've got it, that was great. Allah must be really impressed by what just happened right now, something like that. Because all of these are from the barriers and from the preventative act. So what he's saying now, at the end of it, you ask Allah to forgive you. You ask Allah to forgive that you weren't better than you could have been. You always want to feel as much as you can small, so that you can keep going on. And the moment you feel big is the moment that you're going to stop. And of course, that doesn't mean you end it feeling sad, but you end it feeling grateful. But gratitude only works if you feel small. You feel you've received a gift you didn't deserve, and so on. And so the journey goes on. These are very high things. But the point of all of this is just to point out again that it's a journey. It's a life journey. And if we're patient and we take the steps and we have discipline, and this is the best month for inculcating habits of discipline, then there's no reason why we can't get all of this. And it starts with matters of simply conviction. It starts simply with reverence. And everyone can have an access to that. And on the contrary, people who do many, who learn many facts might not have the reverence. So the point is, it starts from the beginning and it builds up. It starts with humility and prayer. And so we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for all of us to make this a month in which we increase in our connection with the Holy Book, and to make this a month in which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reveals Himself to us, and He changes us through the book, and He gives us a connection through the book that we don't want to ever stay away from ever again. That as the year goes on, and the years go on, and the Ramadans go on, that we find ourselves ever in taraqi, the word He's used here, ever in elevation. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala a'lam, walhamdulillahi rabbil alameen, jazakumullahu khairan. Mafikum. Jazakumullahu khairan.
Yes, sir.
Allah barak fikum.
Nice literature. I want to ask you, how can I feel I reach the taraqi when I reach Quran? And especially, not everybody knows the English. How can I feel that?
So the taraqi, as he's described it here, really connects primarily to the first 2 points. It's about reverence. It's about controlling your thoughts. It's about discipline. It's about directing yourself to Allah. It's about prayer. It's about asking Allah to give you an elevation. And yeah, it's about a life of dhikr. It's about what Ramadan is, which is to show us that sometimes if you deny yourself something of the material, you find an increase in the spiritual. And finally, what the spiritual masters ultimately say is that, because we're taught in this taraqi, if you like, this experience is a gift. And the gift is not something you can demand. It's something you have to strive for and beg for, and be grateful for what you get. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, if you're grateful, He'll give you more. And so perhaps the key is to feel that it's not yours to demand, but it's yours to ask for. And we'll find that whatever we have of the little we find, it's a great thing. You know why? Because when we lose it, then we miss it. You'll find you find some coolness, something subtle, but it was beautiful. But then you miss it, and you say, oh, that was actually something really great. So the idea is, all of us have moments of elevation. We sometimes don't appreciate it. But if we appreciate it, then there's more afterwards. And so the taraqi then is the entire journey. It's the charity, it's the prayer, it's the reverence, it's the tawbah, it's the gratitude. And it comes with the gift that Allah gives. And these other stories He gave, I didn't read one, I've closed the book now. He said, I recited it for 20 years. So what I'm trying to say is patience, as well. What was the story? Just very quickly. Yeah, just a very short statement actually. Thabit al-Bunani from the Salaf, he says, Kabadtu al-Qur'an, from kabid, which is from the liver. Almost like I beat my liver. I really had to struggle. I worked hard with the Qur'an 20 sana, for 20 years. وَتَنَعَمْتُ بِهِ 20 sana. And I found bliss in it for 20 years. And the point they're all saying is not that 20 years or 10 years. The idea is, there is striving. And the gifts come when Allah wills, in very fabulous ways. Again, one last thing, I'm sorry, there's a question back, just one last statement. One of these wise sages, Ibn Ata'illah Sikandari, he says, قَلَّمَا تَأْتِي الْوَارِدَاتُ الْإِلَهِيَّةُ إِلَّا بَغْتَ لِأَلَّا يَدَّعِيَهَا الْعِبَادِ عَلَى وُجُودِ الْإِسْتِعْدَادِ. He says the divine gifts, the spiritual experiences rarely come except suddenly. They come and you don't think you were prepared for it. You're trying, but they come in times you don't even expect it sometimes. And he says, why do they come like that? So that people wouldn't claim that they only claim because they were ready for it. You wouldn't claim it's yours. The point is, we strive, we beg, we pray, but these incredible experiences are for Him to give, and they'll come when He wants it. And we only have to prepare ourselves as much as we can. Allahu A'lam. That's the best I can say. Sorry for the long khitab. Yeah, tafadali. Yeah, tafadali. How one? So that's what we've said right now as well. There is a life journey. It has to...
Just repeat the question, Shaykh.
Sorry, yeah, the question was, again, a similar question. Can we repeat how it is that it enters our hearts and changes us? Because we recite it and we don't change. So like I said, it goes back to very much the things that we've actually been saying from the beginning. But the beginning of it all is you have to feel empty. So look at how the Qur'an starts. Look at how we've been told to pray every day. What's the recitation that you must recite in every prayer? Every prayer is the recitation that says, Ihdina sirat al-mustaqim. What's it saying? Guide me. Every prayer, for the rest of your life, you have to beg to be guided. What does it mean? At some level, you have to feel that there's more guidance that you need. You haven't made it. And every prayer is to remind you, you haven't made it yet. You have to beg for guidance. And so that's the beginning of it. If it becomes simply an act of study, it becomes simply an act of, oh, I've learnt more facts about this statement or this word or this point of grammar or this historical idea, all that is good, but you stopped halfway. You haven't made it to the end. And there are people who reach the end right from the beginning, because it starts simply from, you have to feel that you need something. You're not perfect. You need to be better. And this book can help you. And this book helps you because it connects you to Allah. So that goes to reverence, the most important thing. And we all have stories. I have stories, people from the village. My mum's stepmother, a lady who recited one juz of the Qur'an every day, who performed tahajjud every day, but she couldn't read her own language of Urdu, so she could never read a tafsir, never understood anything. But it didn't stop her for her whole life, reading a juz every single day. And she had a very beautiful ending, to her life, a very spiritual ending to her life. But the point was, they did the best with what they had, and it helped them. And so that's why I'm saying it has to start with feeling empty, feeling the need, feeling the reverence, but then that has to push you to want to learn, to want to understand something of its language, to want to understand what it means to you. And that's why the Qur'an is, although it's very sophisticated, and it has injunctions of law and theology and the world, at the same time it's very simple. One of the miracles of the Qur'an mentioned by Dr. Abdullah Diraz, a very beautiful book, it's translated into English. I don't know what the translation is. The Arabic is An-Nab al-Azim. He says one of the miracles of the book is this simple thing, that it conjoins khitab al-amma with khitab al-khassa simultaneously. That the very expert scholar is addressed by it, and the very simple person is simultaneously addressed by it. And so you have to seek that address, and the basic lesson is very, very simple. And what is the basic, simple address? It's like I've mentioned. It's to do your best to be the best person you can be, because there's a sense of urgency. That's it. And so the message is actually simple. You just connect to it regularly. You try to find that very simple message, and you ask Allah to give you the strength to do it. That's all. And then the journey will take you where it takes you. You might become a scholar of Arabic one day, and the law and everything else. But start in the right place, and wherever the journey takes you, then you'll be connected. If we start in the wrong place, then perhaps we'll stop in different places. Allahu A'lam. I'm speaking as someone who needs the same thing as you. We're all in the same boat. We all need increase. We all have loss, and we all forget. But that's what the scholars have said. The facts are simple, and the journey is simple. But it just takes patience. It takes some discipline. It takes prayer. And I say that as someone who needs exactly the same thing as you, completely. Now.
Thank you for such a beautiful speech. Question is quite simple, quite basic, and that is, how do we help our 8, 10 years old to experience that khushu that you mentioned earlier? How do we help them taste it so they fall in love with it and they grow with it early on, rather than having to find it when they're 20?
Yeah, this is an important question. I can't say that I've succeeded, meaning I've taken someone from A to Z right to the end and I can tell you what the end result is. I can tell you what I've heard from teachers is that, children need what we need. They're not because they're children that they have less of a need. And what I mean by that is if their only experience of the book is, it's this chore they're kind of bullied into, and it's not interesting, and it's, a violent experience, then you're not encouraging them to, you're teaching them how to read, which is fine. But if it's to teach them to have a relationship, you've not set the seeds for anything you might call a healthy relationship. And so you have to see what works for your children. Every parent has to understand their own children. You can't outsource it to some other person to understand what your children need. So for example, my teacher, who's a very leading scholar in tafsir and qira'at, Shaykh Ali Hani in Jordan, he would say, it's very good to help, to encourage children to memorize the Qur'an. But he would personally say, if children really don't like it, then don't force them to do it. And what he would say is instead, let them find a teacher who would just read the Qur'an with them from beginning to end and explain it to them in a way that connects with them. So what I think is more important is to give your children a sense of wonder. To show them that the stories of the Qur'an actually applies to their life. Oh, the Qur'an talks about that. Oh, there's a beautiful story in the Qur'an about that. To let them have a sense of amazement of how much the Qur'an speaks about, and how much it speaks to their lives, and how much it speaks to you as their parent. If it doesn't speak to you, then you can't really make it speak to them. It's something that you're amazed by. You find guidance in, and at the simplest of things, when you're at the park or you're experiencing something, oh yeah, the Quran speaks about that, and here it is. It's relevant, it's vast, it affects you, it's wonderful. You're trying to learn it, and you'd love them to learn it too. It's something we're all on. That's all. And yes, if you can find a teacher who can, literally read it with them, and let them, have it explained to them in terms that they can understand, that's the most powerful thing. And yes, alongside that, you want them to be able to read, even though that might not be as much fun for them, because that's what helps them later on in their lives. You want them to memorize, because that's what will help them later on in their lives. But you can't make that activity so primary and so not interesting that you've set yourself up to fail for what's more important. So you have to balance it. And ultimately, you have to be in amazement, and they have to see your amazement. Allahu A'lam. That's what.